They don't fit, not Gen X, not Millennials. Too analog for one, too digital for the other. They are called Xennials, born between stable systems and digital disruption, raised during a cultural software update. Here's the tension. They remember silence. They remember boredom. They remember memorizing phone numbers. They also built MySpace pages in college dorm rooms. They learned email before smartphones reshaped attention. They watched the internet grow from hobby to infrastructure. Psychologists call this dual environment imprinting. Two developmental climates, one psychological operating system, and that creates friction. They learned independence early. They adapted to acceleration later. They observed authority figures confused by new technology. 9 years old, house key on a shoelace. No call unless it's serious. Latchkey afternoons. Unstructured time. No digital supervision. Not neglected. Autonomous. Not reckless. Self-regulated. Here's the strange part. They were the last children who vanished for hours without panic, and the first adults who became permanently reachable by default. That overlap shaped their baseline nervous system. Behavioral research shows identity forms through repetition. Xennials repeated two different realities during formative years. Offline first. Online second. This changes something important. They distrust institutions instinctively, but they understand bureaucracy fluently. They value privacy deeply, but they maintain digital footprints strategically. They criticize corporate culture openly, but they survive inside it quietly, not confused, context-aware. They grew up during economic optimism and suburban expansion. They entered adulthood during recession and market instability. College felt structured and promised upward mobility. Careers felt unstable and constantly shifting. And this is where it gets interesting. They don't panic publicly. They don't overshare emotionally. They don't chase trends impulsively. They observe. They compare. They calculate. Because they were trained to translate worlds, analog rules, digital expectations. That translator role became internal wiring, measured, skeptical, adaptable. There's a term for this. Cross-era conditioning. Most generations transition once. Xennials transitioned twice before 30. And that split identity doesn't disappear with age. It sharpens under pressure. Quietly, that sharpening has consequences. Not loud, subtle, but measurable. These people move differently in social spaces. They read tone shifts quickly. They detect insincerity early. Why? Because they watched culture flip in real time. They saw authority lose certainty. They saw technology rewrite status. Here's the paradox. They are comfortable alone, but never fully disconnected. They can disappear for hours, but they track group chats silently, not antisocial, selective, not anxious, vigilant. In high-conflict environments, adaptability becomes survival. Xennials matured during cultural whiplash, pre-9/11 optimism, post-9/11 realism, .com rise, .com crash. Stability collapsed publicly, so they built stability internally. Concrete example, office meeting, new trend introduced, everyone excited. They don't react first. They observe reactions. They measure long-term viability, because they've seen hype cycles before. They've seen industries evaporate. They've seen promises expire. This changes workplace dynamics. They rarely overshare ambition. They rarely broadcast insecurity. They rarely trust corporate loyalty. Not cynical, pattern-aware. Behavioral economists call this loss sensitivity. Early exposure to instability increases risk calculation, not fear-based, probability-based. Here's the strange part. They mentor millennials. They report to boomers. They supervise Gen Z, middle position, permanent translator role. They understand analog authority structures. They understand digital reputation systems. That dual literacy gives quiet leverage, but it also creates pressure. They carry cultural memory others don't. They remember life before algorithms shaped identity, so they question trends automatically, not resistant, comparative, not nostalgic, evaluative. And this is where it gets interesting, because constant comparison builds a hidden trait, internal calibration. They rarely swing to extremes. They rarely adopt ideological identities fast. They rarely believe headlines instantly. They cross-check mentally. That restraint looks boring online, but it builds long-term positioning. Still, there's a cost. They don't fully belong anywhere. Too pragmatic for one generation, too skeptical for another. And belonging is a psychological need. That unmet belonging shapes behavior. Not dramatically, quietly. They don't chase identity labels aggressively. They don't perform generational stereotypes loudly. They don't build personality around algorithms. They build around stability. Here's the contradiction. They grew up with freedom. They entered adulthood with uncertainty. So they became planners, emergency funds, backup plans, skill stacking. Not paranoid. Prepared. Not pessimistic. Strategic. Psychologists call this adaptive vigilance. Repeated instability trains future scanning. They anticipate shifts early. They adjust before collapse. Concrete example. Housing market spikes. Peers rush in. They hesitate. Not fearful. Pattern recognizing. They saw 2008. They saw layoffs. They saw safe careers disappear. That memory lives in muscle memory. Here's the strange part. They don't talk about resilience. They demonstrate it. Career pivots, side projects, digital literacy upgrades. They learn to retool quietly, because they were the beta testers of adulthood. First to job hunt online. First to build LinkedIn identities. First to navigate permanent digital footprints. And this is where it expands. As AI accelerates, as institutions destabilize, as younger generations face algorithmic saturation, Xennials are strangely positioned. They understand offline credibility. They understand online leverage. They know how to disappear. They know how to amplify. Not outdated. Bridging. Not behind. Bilingual. Cultural bilingualism becomes power in transition eras. And transition eras are returning. Rapid shifts. System rewrites. Economic volatility. They've been here before. That's the psychological edge. Not louder. Not trendier. Calibrated. But here's the final insight. They were never meant to dominate headlines. They were shaped to stabilize systems. Translator generation. Shock absorber generation. If this pattern feels familiar, if the tension between analog memory and digital reality feels personal, then you're not fragmented, you're cross-conditioned. And that identity isn't confusion, it's leverage. If this felt familiar, if you've ever felt between worlds, not fully claimed by either side, this channel is for you. Subscribe for more psychological breakdowns like this. And if you want to support the work, consider becoming a member. I genuinely appreciate you being here.